If you take my classes at Evolution Yoga, you know that a forward fold for me is like the gateway drug to so many different poses. Inversions, different types of forward fold. This is Thor. All right, boo-boo, I got to get back to work. So forward folds are basically the gateway drug to so many different poses. And in this little video, I'm going to show you how a standing forward fold is going to help you master a seated forward fold or intense Western stretch. So let's look at the forward fold first. I had a student today at the studio, and they were telling me, Vikky, I'm really good at my forward folds, but I have a hard time once I'm sitting down on the earth. When I'm sitting down on the earth, it looks like this. But when I'm standing up, it looks like this. And I knew exactly the limitation was. So let's break down a couple of things. First of all, half forward fold versus forward fold. A lot of times we take a half forward fold and it's mistaken with a half lift. We take it as a throwaway, but actually half forward folds are the prep to a forward fold. So they're not throwaways at all. Now I brought blocks here because for a lot of us, having our fingertips on the earth while we're doing a half forward fold is challenging. And of course you can change the height of the block, right? If you don't use blocks, which is totally cool too, you're gonna have to bend your knees. Now I want you to look at my alignment here. When I'm in this half lift or half forward fold, look where my hips are in alignment to my ankles. And that's important because here's what happens. When we sit on the earth, we no longer have the option of shifting our hips back to make the forward fold happen. When we're standing up, our hips shift back if we're not activating in the preferred way to create a standing forward fold. Our hips shift back, but now once we're seated, we don't have that option. And for a lot of us, we find ourselves sitting more on our tailbone than on our sit bones. I want us to keep in mind too that when we're dealing with forward folds, whether we're on our head, whether we're on our derriere, whether we're on our feet, the primary function, the actual hinging, happens here in the hips. I see this a lot in class. Someone's sitting on their tailbone and they're doing everything that they can to reach for the feet, and then they pull on the feet in the hopes that they're gonna make that space between the body and the legs just a little bit shorter, but that's not the way that the body works. When we're seated back like this, our pelvis is pointing in that direction. Remember, the forward fold happens in the hip joint. So if we're sitting more on our tailbone because the back of the legs are tight or the lower back is tight, whatever the reason is, the pelvis is pointing backwards. The spine sits in the pelvis. So by default, my spine is pointing that way. There's no amount of pulling that's ever going to make that space less if my pelvis is pointing that way. So Vikky, what's a yogi to do? Well, work on your half forward folds and your forward folds so you can actually find progression in your intense Western stretch. So let's take the half forward fold and the forward fold. A couple of things are happening here. Let's say I'm doing my half forward fold, a couple of fingertips dangling off the earth, or the hands are completely off the earth. But I want you to look at my knees. They are locked because the weight is all the way in the back of my heels. I'm never going to be able to pull myself. If my hips are back here behind the line of my ankles, I'm never going to be able to pull myself into a deeper expression of forward fold because what's turned on as I press into my heels are my gluteal muscles. If my gluteal muscles are contracting, it's pulling me back. It's not extending me forward. So that's one. But Vikky, I can't reach the floor to be able to shift forward. Awesome. Bring the blocks in. You can do this at home. You can do this while you're Netflixing. Fingertips on the block, fingertips as in line with the feet as much as possible. Unlock the knee, right? Now we're going to be able to shift forward. And as we do that, we want to press the front of the feet, the balls of the feet. We want to press the mat away with those because that's going to contract these front leg muscles. Another thing, half forward fold is your prep for forward fold. So instead of tucking the chin in or just dangling, your objective now is unlock the knees so you can access those lower leg muscles, shift the hips forward so more of the weight is in the front of the feet, and keep checking in with the knees, because every time we move our center of balance, we have a tendency of locking the joints and using them for strength, but they're not meant for strength, they're meant for range of motion. So as I inhale, I'm going to reach the crown of the head away. As I exhale, draw the navel in. Notice how I am not tucking my chin in. My objective is to shift my hips forward as much as I can as I make my way down. Bend the knees as much as you need to be able to shift. See, even with my knees bent, my hips are over my heels, and I'm in my forward fold with deeply bent knees. Half forward fold. We're pushing the mat and the blocks away the whole time, whether we're extending or whether we're hinging forward. So I want you to think of the trajectory of a forward fold. For a lot of us, we think it's forehead to knee. And to make this contact, that's one of the reasons we lock our knees and try to, curl the spine in to be able to do that. But it's not possible. These ribs are not going to allow us to get any further. So the hinging happens in the hips, correct. Shift forward, push the mat away with the feet, unbend the knees to access muscles. Exhale, draw the navel in, reach away, like you're really almost going to teeter forward. But you're not, because your fingertips are pushing the mat away and they're also supporting you. Getting out of the habit of shifting the hips back. If my heels line up with my hips, or my hips line up with my heels, and I'm working at getting that forward fold without going back, once I sit down, I'm going to have the same line. Hi, Thor. Now that I'm sitting, these hips have nowhere to go. So whatever limitation I have in my hips, whatever limitation, what old pattern of behavior that I had is not going to help me here. The trajectory of a seated forward fold, of really any forward fold, is not down, but away from the hips. I want you to think this instead of this. So let's take it one step at a time. I take a nice deep inhale. As I exhale, I draw the navel in, because that's when you do your folds and your twists when you're exhaling. As I inhale, I support myself. Pause from extending forward. Exhale, draw the navel in, hinge forward a little bit more. Keep the neck in line, roll the eyes to keep looking forward. Exhale, draw the navel in. And then we can take the bind. But until then, if we've got this much space in between the torso and the legs, I don't recommend, because the pulling is actually it feels like we're getting lower, but what's actually happening is the arms are rotating forward. It looks like we're having this deeper curve in our spine, but that part of our spine doesn't really curve, to be honest with you, because the ribs keep it stationary. Another suggestion, roll the back of the mat up to bring the hips just a little higher than the knees. For some of us it's a lot, for some of us it's a little less. And now you'll notice that it tilts me forward already, right? And it takes the pressure out of the knees. I don't recommend sitting on a block. A block, even this low one, is going to be too high. And if the back of the legs are off the mat, it's going to make you hyperextend the knee and really start pulling on those ligaments that give stability to the knees. So now that my hips are just a fraction higher, I can work at, and I bring my hands onto my hip crease, flex the feet, exhale, draw the navel in, extend away from my hips. As I get lower, I keep my neck neutral and I roll the eyes to look forward. These tiny little changes on how we get into the pose instead of dying for the result, these little changes are part of the process. Fall in love with the process of getting into poses instead of thinking of whatever expression is the finish line. Everything is a continuum. Life is a continuum, events are a continuum, and a pose is a continuum. We tend to think, because the brain wants to categorize things, we tend to think of things as beginning, middle, and end, but it's not. You're just literally flowing and breathing through one range of motion and then another range of motion. And you'll notice that forward folds come in a lot at the beginning of our practice, so we're able to do this kind of forward fold later on. You can find me on VikkySantana.com or teaching in-studio classes at Evolution Yoga in Coconut Creek, Florida, or you can find me on Instagram at Vikkysantana.yogatraining. Hope to see you soon.